Since 1981, when Trish and I went into the ministry, I've noted a few things about church growth. I've seen a few things that are sort of fascinating and also disturbing about churches today. As I look back over 30 plus years now, churches that are stagnant, there's a common thread to them. And in the next couple of weeks, I want to share some of those threads. Today, I want to share a handful of reasons that I believe some churches are not growing or keeping up with the growth rate of their community, or not adding anybody to their fellowship in a single year. I think one of the main reasons is that most churches are declining is that they're still stuck in the 80s. I want you to go back there for a moment this morning. Some of us can do that. We're there. We remember the 80s. The big hairdos and everything. We remember 30 plus years ago what church was like. Churches that are still in the 80s, they're stuck in a time warp. The world has passed them by. If you were to ask anybody today about those who were stuck in the 80s in that time warp, they would say something like this: they're outdated. They're irrelevant. So why has that kind of testimony befallen so many churches? And why are the vital signs unhealthy? Why aren't more churches reproducing, reinforcing, reviving, and revitalizing just like Jesus promised in the growing all by itself principle? It would be very easy for you and I to sit here and simplify the issue. We could all offer reasons why we believe churches that are stuck in that time warp have failed to grow, have actually declined. But just like addressing a bleed out or a cardiac arrest, we cannot afford to oversimplify this issue. So how about if we take a real candid look at some things that happen in some churches who are stuck in the 80s? And before I do that, I want you to watch a small video clip. I think it explains what some of us are unwilling to admit about our church today. Watch this video.
Imagine a church where every member is passionately, wholeheartedly, and recklessly calling the shots.
I don't know who sets the worship center temperature, but why does it have to be cold?
Why do you have to be so right? Heated chairs are now being installed.
This one wants a small church, but I'm afraid if it's too small, they're going to make me volunteer like crazy. And I don't stack chairs, do I?
Makes total sense. Join now and we'll let you decide the size of our church.
We're millennials, and we want a church that...
Say no more. Any request you have will be granted immediately.
Parking is horrible. It takes me almost 6 minutes to get from my car to the building. Oh.
It's going to take me 6 seconds to tell you a valet service is on the way.
My pastor's preaching, it's all over the map. I say, I don't know, stick with the books of the Bible. We should be only exegetical.
Okay, next week we start John chapter 1, verse 1. And we'll even start pronouncing that word the way you said it.
Hey, I'd like the sermon to be no longer than 30 minutes.
How does 15 minutes sound?
Hey, anybody willing to go 15 should be willing to go to 10.
You drive a hard bargain. But from now on, 5-minute sermons it is.
Now you're talking.
Me Church, where it's all about you.
That is a reality, folks. Done in a parody form, but that is a real issue or issues today in a lot of churches. So let's break this down a little bit. I want to talk about some things I've watched over the last 35 plus years in dealing with churches who are frozen in a time warp. They're still doing ministry like they did it in the 80s. Those who are frozen in a time warp try to shelter themselves from the culture. Again, think back, folks. Some of you were there, so let's do that this morning. Let's think back. In the 1980s, congregations were typically part of the mainstream culture. Congregations were accepted. Congregations were supported. Congregations were embraced. Congregations were even revered. That's not the culture today. Today, if people can find some extra time, many will, watch this, use church as a one-day getaway from the realities they will not face any other time of the week. Another thing I've observed is this: those who are frozen in time warp, they have discovered programs were easy answers. They discovered that programs were easy answers. A large majority of churches in the 80s were program-driven. If there was a perceived need in the congregation, they would make a landline phone call to order a resource packet and get a 3-ring binder that best solved that need. Too many churches today think they can still get their quick fixes from the same kind of programs. Another thing I've watched is this: those who were frozen in a time warp catered largely to the needs of the members. While we all love to play the blame game, the government is not fully at blame here. The church has created its own culture of entitlement. We started it 30-some years ago. We designed memberships that are me-driven. Today, only a handful of church members will sacrifice to reach their communities and change their culture. So those who are frozen in this time warp make demands that their own needs and their own priorities and preferences need to be at the top of the list for 2 of the 3 churches they choose to support. There was a day and hour, and many of you realize this, you supported one church. It was your church. It was the family's church. It was great-granddad's church, and we're going to stay with this church. That's not the case today. The average person supports 2 or 3 churches. Those who were frozen in time warp also realized change was more incremental. If a church today decides to stay stuck in the 80s, guess what? It doesn't have to worry about the accelerated pace of the 21st century. Frozen members can actually pretend that their church doesn't need to keep up. They don't need to thrive just as long as they survive, despite the upside-down state of the world. Fact is this, folks, all of us know this. Let's admit it to ourselves and to our church. We live in mobile moments.